Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alonzo Watson, and today we'll be discussing this week's study of social psychology. In summary, we'll discuss another element um, of social influence in which how we conform, comply, and obey. Although the topic studied this week examined our behaviors amongst groups, I learned through understanding the concepts of the behaviors through um, our studies of reading, which was the social psychology from Kaysen and theories of social theories in social psychology from Chad, and then there's also the article that will I'll briefly give you an example through Ree's article provided a great illustration of conformity amongst adolescents and alcohol within a group. But before I get started, I'd like to first say Happy Thanksgiving to all of you. And I look forward to kind of going through the next 5 topics in which conformity complies to our everyday lives. And like I mentioned before, there's going to be, I'm going to list the 2 questions at the end of the video, and I'll also have them listed on our post. Um, in addition to that, I wanted to provide you the sources in which um, the discussion will take place. And like mentioned already, social psychology, our primary text, and then the theories in social psychology, which is our secondary text, and the article in which, excuse me for a second, I'm just gonna bend down for a second and pull this article up. But the article is by Carter Rees and Danielle Wallace, The Myths of Conformity, Adolescence from an unhealthy, from all the unhealthy drinking behaviors that's happening out there today. I tried to tie in this article because it made sense for me, but I think it's some good conversation. So kind of what we'll do as I go through the topics, like mentioned, I'll give you the example later on about Reese's article, and then the key points in interest this week. The main question, which will be one of the questions at the end of at the end of the video, which is why do we have the tendencies to conform? And then we'll kind of go down into from conformity. We'll talk about compliance. Why do we comply? And then why do we obey? And we'll also talk about majority influence. I think that's a great concept in which we behave. And then we'll end it with mixed emotions and social dilemmas. So that's kind of what we'll talk about today. So we'll just jump right into it. And the main question is, why do we conform? In my perspective, because we're human, and it's nature to feel a need to interact socially. Being a part of a group allows us to feel safety, feel a feeling of safety and support, as well as knowledge and behavior, guidance. It is within a group interactions that we learn a mental transition from I to we, which in my perspective, I think we conform for many different reasons. There's an assortment of research that says we conform for 2 different reasons, and our textbook says one being informational and the other being a narrative influence. From the informational standpoint, this style of influence, to accurately best describe it, is from it's judgmental. It's a judgmental feeling of a situation. For example, we use online ratings to either conform to buy or visit a restaurant based on the feedbacks of the masses. That's informational. We use that, and I use it all the time. I kind of allow that to drive my decisions on where we're going to eat dinner, or what restaurant is the best pizza place to eat at. So we conform based on what the mass majority says. In contrast, from a narrative standpoint, we conform solely on fear of consequences or rejections from the group. Um, this concept makes sense to me because um, one, no one wants to be ostracized in a group. No one wants to feel left out, and because of this, we tend to conform to the norms of the group, to basically just to fit in. Um, this reminds me of the old saying my parents would always tell me, and it makes sense to me. You are who your friends are. Um, Over time, I think because we're so eager to fit in, and one of the um, kind of information that was kind of took hold to me was in our text of theories of psychology. Um, it talks about the fairness assessment of equality, and basically, I'll just read it. Um, Most interpersonal relationships are built around trust, mutual respect, and genuine concern for their other person. Genuinely, people do not enter a relationship with fairness issues at the forefront of their minds. However, many people of all different backgrounds and are familiar with the golden rule, and I actually believe this. Treat others as you would like to be treated. Um, it goes no further than that. You cannot expect anything, um, any type of behavior from another outside of what you're producing for that group or individual. And I read that and I thought to myself, that's the concept in which my parents were talking about, which is you are who your friends are. And over time, I've even heard some concepts in the sense of, for couples that have been married for years, um, that they begin to look like each other from a physical standpoint. And I haven't done any research behind it, but I can see, I've kind of paid attention to that along the way. And I can see how we become one in that aspect. And so the big question that I'm looking for as we go through this week's discussion is to hear your viewpoint on why do we conform. There are many theories out there. The Ash theory that talks about just through the general group, people tend to just go along with the norm. And then there's, as I transition into the next topic, which is the minority influence, which I also think is um, a real strange concept whenever you think about the conformity. And basically the concept of majority influence from a conformity standpoint is difficult for many. I like this concept from a leadership perspective because there is a sense of independence associated here. Research has found that what's called majority slowness effect, and it's all based around the delayed response from people expressing the unpopular decision. And this information came from our text, social psychology, our main text, and basically what this is in my perspective, my majority influence has the tendency, the tremendous impact on leadership, because there are people that look up to you, and these are the people that stand up by their beliefs regardless of what the majority says. And kind of what we talked about with the Reeves article, and this is the example, suggests that the minority can have a more influential effect than the majority in that domain in the sense of alcohol. So basically, what it's saying is when there is a minority when someone is looked up to and they decide to stick to their to their goals, and if basically if the majority of people are drinking at a party, and there's this one person that sticks to his or her beliefs and not drink, that impact is a lot greater from a leadership standpoint. And I contribute this behavior to the fact that when people of a minority influence commits to a behavior, that decision is slowly and well thought out. When those people, many people react quickly, but I believe that there's a sense of leadership whenever you built a concept that you have the ability to think through a situation and not overreact or underreact, and you stick to your goals. And that's where I believe minority influence has a tremendous impact on from a leadership standpoint. And then as we press forward through all that, why do we comply? That's the, and there are many reasons from a compliance standpoint, and our text tells us that people follow the expectations of the group's norms, and we comply to fit in. And I talked a lot about fitting in, talked a little bit about leadership, and how all those things tie in. But why do we comply? Why are we in compliance? And how do people get others to comply from a self-serving standpoint? And that's the big question whenever we're talking about conformity, we're talking about compliance and obedience. I think there are many motives. We'll talk about mixed motives and social dilemmas here in a bit, but I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about compliance. And compliance takes many forms, and I'm reading this from our textbook. These includes friends, plea for help, selfishness, and for example, can you do me a favor? This also includes the pop-up ads on the internet. We tend to feel sorry for situations, and we comply to them out of our own norm, and most of it is to fit in. Most of it is for our personal satisfaction, and so compliance is kind of ties into conformity. It's that dilemma where we start to get into things, and then just obedience. That's the next big topic, and I think I'm a military person. I'm in a leadership position, and I think I kind of started to fall out of the true understanding of obedience just from a military standpoint, and we have to comply. We have to obey. It's an expectation, but that's not true for normal society. And so our textbook tells us that obedience comes from different forms. For example, blind obedience may seem funny, but if people are willing to take orders from a total stranger, how far will they go when it really matters? And the text also talks about a little bit, there's a total stranger on the street, and if you ask for a favor or you ask for compliance, people will more than likely obey to something based off of uniform and the social status of meaning. Meaning, if a police officer asks you to pull your ID out, you're more inclined to be obedient to that and stick to those wishes versus a random stranger asking you to pull your ID card out. You would probably just keep walking. So that's kind of that's the concept behind obedience. And now I will just kind of finish off as I don't want to keep you guys too long, but I can run. We're at 15 minutes, I think, at this point. But I just want to quickly get into the mixed emotions and social dilemmas. I thought this was a pretty cool concept. And basically, in a nutshell, it's the concept. It's challenging because it requires us to think about everyone's best interests in a given situation. What can be great for yourself is sometimes devastating to others, and it's called a social dilemma. And our text talks about it. Often, we are pursuing our own self-interest, like in my case, with the possible PCS I moved to Colorado Springs, which was great personally for me and my girlfriend's relationship. However, because of the momentum that my commander and I have built within our unit back in California, there is going to be a setback for them. The situation has mixed motives and is causing a social dilemma for me. The approach overall enhances the ability to remain unselfish and always think about the big picture. In other words, this concept enhances our critical thinking skills from my perspective. So it allows us to really broaden our concept and think about others and not, and I think our brains, once we start to train ourselves to be more open-minded, we become better members of society. So that's what I have for you this week. I appreciate your time. Thank you. And I look forward to your answers to, really, why do we conform? And the second question I had came from Psalms 25, 2 through 4. And basically it was David's, David is requesting God to teach him the path of wisdom. And my question to you is, how can you correlate that concept of David asking God for the way? How do you correlate that with conformity? And that's what I have for you this week. And thank you. I appreciate it. Bye.